Hello, I'm Amber Lynn Vital, and I've just flown across the country from New York to California. I'm in the Los Angeles area to meet up with a good friend and fellow health warrior to discuss all things cannabis. With the passing of the federal 2018 Farm Bill in the USDA, we are now in an environment that is a bit of shifting sands, so to speak, with respect to what of cannabis is legal and how can it be used. The environment here in California has been different for a long time, with medical and recreational marijuana use legal. And in the rest of the country, states that don't have it legalized, we're looking at using CBD-rich extracts from hemp. What's the difference? What difference does it make in people's lives and in their health? What difference does it make when you have doctors prescribing it versus going into a health food store and getting it yourself? We'll cover all that and more in this segment. Hello, I'm Amber Lynn Vital. I'm here with Mieko Perez, who is a national, actually international, expert in medical cannabis. Please check out her bio below. Google her, find out everything that you can. So first, let's talk about the terminology. I think one of the things that I really want to get clear, because the semantics drive me crazy. So if I'm talking about the cannabis plants, cannabis sativa, stop me if I'm doing something wrong, cannabis indica, but they're really all sativa and flower with different cultivars and chemovars with different effects. Now, what if we're talking about a product that is an extract from hemp versus an extract from, do I say now cannabis? Do I say marijuana? What do I say? What is the terminology we want to use?
So when I speak in publicly, especially in medical settings, I use the term cannabis.
Across the board?
Across the board. If it's CBD, then I say CBD.
Okay.
But with regards to all of the different terminology that you hear, it boils down to why we even started using cannabis and the term that it was coined or given in a medical setting. So I use cannabis. A lot of other consumers or professionals may be comfortable with marijuana, but because I started and using it for medical reasons, I definitely use the terminology of cannabis.
And so the only reason we would want to distinguish that it's coming from industrial hemp is for federal USDA legality.
For that very reason, and we want to be able to empower consumers, and in the manner in which we do that, we say, you know, this is cannabis, typically THC or full spectrum, or cannabis full spectrum is with THC, CBD is CBD, all the other compounds, CBC and CBD, they're all named, but with regards to hemp, we definitely want to identify hemp as hemp.
For those states where only hemp-derived products are
allowed.
legal.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. So that leads us into then this concept of full spectrum. Just define it for me one more time, like
so
you just did.
Full spectrum is including THC. Okay. Full spectrum is the entire plant.
Okay. And
also you can say full spectrum, whole plant. Those two are the ones that I use, because when I walk into to speak with medical directors, I want to be very clear that full spectrum and whole spectrum and all these other names include THC.
Okay, so full spectrum includes THC, period. It is coming from a whole plant initially. It is not a synthetic.
Right.
You can't be full spectrum and have a synthetic in there. It relates both to the botany, that it's coming from a whole plant, and to the inclusion of THC.
That's correct.
Okay. So if you had something that was a THC isolate, that's not full spectrum either.
No,
because it's
THC
excluding CBD and other cannabinoids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or there's very small percentage to even, and that's really confusing too. You know, you have products that are low THC that have CBD in them, but they still have THC in them. So they're still considered cannabis, or sometimes still considered a whole spectrum. every company has their own definition. Although we have guidelines in the state of California, they're still, they're still in progress and really tweaking and narrowing down what consumers really need to see. And there is there's no one word that's wrong.
Okay.
And at least with my patients that are coming in from a medical setting, I have to reel them back in and start from scratch. Just because it's a low THC and it has CBD, it's still a low THC. It's not without THC.
So is there any point at which you would say it is not full spectrum? Because really, from a biological perspective, even if you cannot detect the THC any longer, if it was originally in there, it's still there. So would you say with the action in people's body, it's always there?
So I tend to believe that it's always there. Even without consuming cannabis, we have an endocannabinoid system. And so we already produce cannabinoids. Some of us produce enough, some of us are insufficient. And so because of that, I definitely think that there will always be traces, but because of the guidelines, we're actually able to say, well, if this doesn't reach this percentage, then we can call it a CBD. Or if it goes over a certain percentage, or if this is hemp derived or full spectrum. So it becomes a matter of room for interpretation for probably all of the products that are here, except for the very obvious guidelines that have been set.
We have an endocannabinoid system. We make a multitude of compounds that interact with what is being discovered as the endocannabinoid system, as important as the circulatory system, as important as the nervous system, as important as the digestive system, as important as the immune system, and interacting with all of those different receptors, the most elucidated of which are CB1 and CB2 receptors. Your body makes a wealth of cannabinoids endogenously. The most well elucidated of those are anandamide and diacylglycerol, or 2-AG, which we know bind typically to the CB1 receptors. But what we're finding out is that all of these other cannabinoids that you can make from omega-3 fats bind more to CB2 receptors and interact in all kinds of ways throughout the body. What we know, or we think we know about, because it's always changing.
Yeah, it's always changing.
Let's take a moment and be humble to the plant and to our own bodies and to all the things that we don't know and that we are still discovering. There are many things we do not know, and they are changed by all kinds of factors. And so these endocannabinoids that bind the CB2 receptors have interactive effects with the CB2 receptors. Also, when we get into exogenous cannabinoids, so ones that we take in typically from cannabis plants, but it could be echinacea. There's in chocolate, there are things that interact with the endocannabinoid system, truffles, there's all kinds of other plants that interact. Citrus peel, a fungus on a pine tree, there's all kinds of, or lichen. So there's all kinds of other things that interact from the outside exogenously. And what we do think we know is that THC compounds in cannabis tend to interact with the CB1 receptors, tend to bind them pretty solidly like a ball in a glove. And the other cannabinoids, your CBDs, your CBGs, your CBNs, they tend to interact with both CB1 and CB2 receptors, but they don't really bind them. And they certainly don't bind with the CB1 receptors, but they interact and can have an interplay with how THC affects the body. So let's talk about that, because there's something that you learned along the way that research definitely supports, which is that separately dosing, and here we're talking truly about isolates, separately dosing CBD at a different time and with a different protocol and over different days than THC can have profound therapeutic effects.
Yeah. Most of the patients who are walking into my office, they're direct referrals from physicians. And so just because of working with children on the spectrum for the last 10 years, I have a different sense of being in tune with the patient's body when they come in. And so typically I'll get a list of opioids that they're on or any other type of medications. And when the patients come in, I realize that, you know, some of them are first-time patients. They're sensitive to all of the medications. That's number 2 reason why they're coming to my office, is because they have a sensitivity to the medications that they're using. And that immediately tells me I need to break up the whole plant. So I typically use a CBD to prime the body for the first 72 hours. And then I start a THC regimen. And every patient that walks into my office has a different goal. So it is a combination of the entire team. You know, it's the nursing team, it's the physician, it's myself, it's actually the patient's daily life that we take into consideration when making that decision. But immediately, sensitivity to other medications means that I now have to build a life plan. And typically what I'll do is I'll break up the CBD, the CBG, or the CBC, and I'll break up the THC as well. And 2 years later, 3 years later, it is proven to be very beneficial and in the best interest of patients that are walking through my door.
Right. It's interesting from where I'm coming from. I tapped into some research that actually said very specifically that pre-dosing with CBD before THC has a different beneficial effect on the pharmacokinetics of the THC, the actual plasma concentrations, and the way that it works in the body, which you've seen, you've witnessed.
I've been able to see it, and I'm very reluctant. I still remain. I'm not a cannabis consumer to date, but I can tell you that when the patients walk into my office, I'm not so quick to start with THC because I don't want to stunt their body. I don't want their body to be shocked, when they're taking in cannabis for the very first time. And so I tend to do things gradually. And again, my job is to find the most appropriate product, the product that yields results, a product that actually I have a relationship with and I know, and that I could, basically contact the company and say, here's my feedback. And most importantly, I answer to medical directors and physicians and families. So I definitely, when it comes to making a decision with placing a patient on CBD first, it's definitely in the best interest of that patient. And how their body reacts to the medications before they walk through my door.
And this could be children on the spectrum, it could be adults with any kind of a condition. And so just to clarify, when you say they come in and they're on medications, they could be pharmaceutical medications prescribed, they could be over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, and they could be over-the-counter or practitioner prescribed supplements.
Right.
And all of the above have an effect.
Right, because when they walk through the door, it's the unknown.
Right.
And I can't, their doctor gives me information, which is great, but sometimes I have patients that come in here without any information. And so depending on what their goals are is how I'm able to find products that are going to complement, they're already, whatever medication regimen they're on. But I do specifically know when a new patient comes in, and even patients who had cannabis in the 70s. Well, this is now 2019, and you can fly to multiple planets, and one afternoon. And so I try to be very mindful of that. I'm probably one of few that will say, wait, we're going to do, this is the regimen we're going to do before you start THC, and then we're going to do THC in a moderate level. Right. The most appropriate starting point is the most important key to being successful with cannabis therapies.
And one of the things that we're pretty certain of in research is the elucidation of the mechanism of THC binding receptors, and it's pretty tight. And that's what makes the euphoric effect. Here, I just want to take a minute, because a lot of people say CBD is not psychoactive. And I do like what I have come across that says, well, actually anything that affects your state of mind is psychoactive. Mm. It may not be euphoria inducing, and in a way that you can't come out of it. Maybe you can't operate heavy machinery, or you can't get off the couch, or which THC can cause because of its tight binding. But CBD still, because it has an effect on your central nervous system and the way that your brain functions, technically, right, mm-hmm. is still psychoactive. So I like the word euphoria inducing, or altering a state of mind to where you maybe can't function the way that you normally would. And so functionality then becomes mm-hmm. a huge factor in determining what you're going to use to help people accomplish their goals.
Right. And whether it's 45 minutes or 2 hours, it's worth coming and having a consult to be able to build that plan. Mm-hmm. I started very early on, and without my medical team to support my decision, I don't think that I would be sitting here speaking with you. And so it's really important that I try to incorporate the entire team, mm-hmm. because I feel, yes, your patient's coming into my office, but at the same time, I want you to know that here's the bridge, and so let's do this as a team. And there's some patients who come in who will never try THC, mm-hmm. And so it's really knowing your patient. Mm-hmm. And I think I commend the physicians that I work with saying, we're going to send you over to Mieko to have a consult and
create a plan.
Right, and create a plan mm-hmm. that we're all aware of.
Mm-hmm. Because the endocannabinoid system is dynamic.
Yes.
And there are so many things that affect it. The sun exposure that you get, whether it's just on your skin or just the light exposure getting out in the morning, affects your pineal gland. That affects the endocannabinoid system. The food that you eat, the toxins that you take in or breathe in, the hugs that you get, the laughter that you get, the types of fats that you eat or don't eat. So what is your omega-3 intake compared to your omega-6 intake, for example? I mean, these are just a few of the things that affect so many aspects of our health. A lot of it happens to be through the endocannabinoid system. What is the health of your gut and your microbiome? And this is where I really want to get into the priming the system, because as with any plant and anything that we consume orally especially, is going to interact with the microbes in our body. Right. And when it does that, everybody's microbiome is their fingerprint. Everybody's is different. Even if you're putting probiotics in, that doesn't make your microbiome like it says on the box. There's mm-hmm. all of these, there's trillions of microorganisms in there interacting with one another and with everything that you take in. It's no different when you take in an oral dose of cannabis, whatever the ratios are. Mm-hmm. It's going to interact with your gut and with the microbiome. Right. And so some of the most fascinating work that Mieko has talked to me about, because it matches with what I witnessed very early on in my career in integrative nutrition and functional medicine, was that you have, let's just talk about children. You have a child that has been assessed, they've done all these tests, and they say this child is deficient in magnesium, zinc, selenium, omega-3s, they're not processing their fatty acids well, we need them on a protein powder, and they start supplementing all of these. And their stool test says that they're deficient in lactobacillus acidophilus type of organisms, so we're going to plug all of these things into their regimen. Then they wind up in Mieko's office, now more agitated, more symptomology, now constipated, mm-hmm. And the mom's going, why? They're missing all of these things. We plug them in. Why is it not working?
Yeah, well, number one, it's hard for us to keep up. Number two, it can be very expensive. Mm-hmm. Number three, that is too many supplements in one body all at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's very important that we start gradually. We
and
don't
change slowly.
We don't start with 14, and because we're not going to be able to figure out which one is working if it is working,
and what they need to stay on.
Right, and so it goes back to why with certain patients, especially patients with gut issues, I separate the entire plant because I need to be able to give that information to a physician and say, this THC worked, and it worked at this time, this frequency, this dosage. The CBD worked at this, the same, same regimen, but there's no way that you can do that with, you have an 18 to 1, or 18 to 1, 30 to 1, 5 to 1.
Yeah.
I cannot definitively tell the physician what's working. And so, because I am held accountable for each and every product that is purchased for these patients, I tend to separate all of the compounds so I can know specifically what's working at what time, why, what do we need to address. And I learned that from my son Joey. It was very, very simple. He started out with 14 medications, and it was a slow go. It took us a few years, but he was down to 4 medications that work. And then I would supplement as needed with cannabis. But even with his cannabis, it was THC. And so I started separating compounds, long time ago. And so now I just apply the same protocol to patients who come in with sensitivity to most of the medications.
This protocol of discovery.
Exactly.
Not the same protocol of, Joey needed this much CBD on this many days and then this much THC. That is an individualized protocol. Somebody else's is going to be different.
Right, and I definitely learned how to customize the protocol to every patient's own endocannabinoid system. And so sometimes it's 72 hours, sometimes it's 5 to 7 days, sometimes it's 10 to 15 days. But what I guarantee is a result. And that has to do with working with that patient's goals.
Right. Not just prescribing by
there's what I've learned is pain is relative. There are some patients that can endure pain, and there are some patients that need immediate pain or need to address the immediately. But most of the patients that come in, what I try to do is provide them with a realistic result. Everything that you read on the internet, and obviously we're on the internet, but doesn't apply to you specifically when it comes to cannabis.
No. Everyone's trying to see themselves in that person's story and make a leap of faith that that's going to work for them.
And I'm definitely a firm believer of hope and resilience and change. And that's one of the reasons why I remain in the cannabis industry.
So in the beginning of your journey with your son and environment in an era when it was not readily available, what forms of cannabis were you able to start using? So
the only form that was available to me was in the flower form. That was 2009, very, very early on. And I remember looking up brownie recipes because I knew Joey loved chocolate. And so I said, well, what would be the most appropriate starting point for my son? He's 42 pounds, he needs to eat, he loves chocolate. And that's where our journey began. Fast forward 10 years later, you name it, and the cannabis industry has created it.
And I want to just take this moment to thank you and Joey for what you have fearlessly pioneered in a time when it was scary. It's still scary for parents to consider taking this route with their children. But I think as mothers, we know we'll do anything for our kids. And we will say, I don't know where this path is going to take us, but I know my child needs help and I'm willing to get it. Well, because of all of that bravery and all of those efforts, today we're in a position where it can be administered in ways that are accepted and in doses that are appropriate and in delivery systems that make sense. And yet there's still an environment where, could you explain a little bit about the laws here when a parent comes to a physician and says, I want to use, or I already have a product, what do you think about me using this with my child?
Wow, that's kind of a loaded question. It comes with many unresolved I tend to really kind of stay on the fence. I'm glad that we were actually able to open the door to cannabis therapies. I'm very thankful to live in California and very thankful for the states who are now adding autism as a list of conditions and states across the country. But the education curve for families, we really are doing a disservice. I sit on multiple boards, international boards, and one of the board positions allows me to intervene in child protective service cases. When the cannabis industry was creating laws for states, they don't really understand the dynamics of our home and how many government agencies we have in our home. And the big one is they didn't realize that there were state negligence laws. And most of the negligence laws have not been changed in probably years. Or amended. And because of that, and not being able to give education, adequate education to special needs families as well as any other families with regards to how to become a caregiver. Just because you live in a state that has recreational laws doesn't mean you can walk into a dispensary and purchase a product for your child who's under 21. There is still a protocol in place in which you need to obtain a caregiver's license, but I find more and more parents walking into my office and not even knowing that one
first step,
they miss it. And then I go into having a legal background for the last 15 years, then I go into, legal advocate, family law. Stop, we can't do cannabis first. We need to be able to go over all of, I need to teach you how to navigate first. And so a lot of parents are surprised. And I said, this is how I'm gonna stop Child Protective Services walking into your home until further federal laws are passed.
Right. So let's pause a moment. You need to tell parents right now. If you're in California.
If you're in California or a state that has recreational laws, you need to get a caregiver's license for your child.
First thing,
because what happens is you have a parent who doesn't understand how to use cannabis, but has read all over the internet on what may work for their child. That's great, but there's no child alike in the autism spectrum. And so because of that, you need to go get a caregiver's license, and you need to have a conversation with an advocate who's actually proficient in autism. There's a lot of, I've had a lot of physicians contact me and say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that giving a child who's on the lower end of the spectrum a percentage of CBD makes them have more anxiety. So there's a lot of, since 2009, I've consulted with hundreds of families. And so, you have a family that will have a side effect, and then we'll take them to the hospital. And to date, the physician is obligated to contact Child Protective Services, and then it becomes a completely different conversation. And ultimately, we're already under a lot of pressure. A parent like myself, if we've already said, I want to go to cannabis because nothing else is working, we've exhausted all other treatment options, we are in dire straits. We are, and the last thing we want is a child protective service supervisor coming into our home and challenging us as parents when they have no idea. I mean, I've walked into homes where I've seen holes in the walls and padding on the walls and just extreme measures. And I'm thinking to myself, cannabis, could be very useful to help with providing just directions
shifting
for a child.
the whole direction of this child's health. Yes.
Yeah, and so
but once you've attracted CPS into that home where the backstory is not known,
it's a complete disconnect. And so at least what I do when families contact me is I teach them how to put together a solid Bible of documentation that will stand up in any court.
Right. And so they're protected. It makes their life easier, not to mention documenting what is going on with with you, if you're the patient, with your child, so that you can keep track of what works, what doesn't work. Organization is key.
And that's just it. I have families who I've been working with for 10 years. I have families and I will hand walk every single patient, every single family until they get it. And then they can still continue to contact me. I realized I needed to be the person I needed in 2009, and that meant no days off.
Right. You became that person.
Right.
We've set a backdrop now for what Mieko does, which is medical. This is California. This is where you're operating. You may talk to people all over the nation, you may talk to people all over the world, but this is where you're operating, which is California. So, but around the nation, you have states that have different kinds of state laws, different kinds of local laws, and then you have federal laws, and then you have people in Canada that's very close with their laws, which are differing. And so let's try to define let's first define the terms: medical, supplemental, meaning dietary supplement or natural products industry, and then also the word recreational is important to define. Open up that can of worms.
Recreational, also known as adult use.
Okay, that's a great word. That's a great term.
I like using adult use rather than recreational because I do feel that even without a medical recommendation, if you're, there's a large percentage, probably over 45% of the consumers that walk into a dispensary either have not been diagnosed or as not being diagnosed mean there's a very large percentage of men over 45 that walk into our dispensary, and I really think that that's because men are not known for going into dispensaries, and so
the doctor,
to a doctor.
They don't want a doctor's appointment.
So when I say adult use, I'm talking about that over 45 age group, which typically. Because they don't have a traditional medical license or a medical recommendation, but I definitely would like to use adult use rather than recreational.
And yet adult use does not, and this is the differentiation, adult use could be that they are still medicating. They're looking for something that is going to make them feel better, whether it's what would be common reasons?
So typically, anxiety. Anxiety is one of the
work stress, work anxiety. We know that middle-aged men are under a tremendous amount of work stress that they don't address at the doctor, and that leads to, all kinds of chronic degenerative diseases.
Yeah, and also I've seen a alarming rate of women over 40 coming in that are not coming in for a medical condition, but they're coming in because they're overworked and they're overwhelmed. And then I'm seeing the over 60 crowd. That is my favorite because they come in and they want to try the new cannabis from 2019 and they're just kind of they're a joy to be around. So I figure once they get to a dispensary, they're like, yes, we want everything. We want to try. And they actually, that over 60 age group has been probably one of the most open age groups that I've seen walk into dispensaries.
Are they coming to the dispensary with a medical condition that they're looking for help with that, or are they coming with just this open-mindedness and realize it could actually help?
I think it's 50-50. And I think once they get here and they see the vast selection of products, they I can't believe this. It comes in a vape pen, and and most of the patients that come in, they started off as flower consumers, and they end up leaving with edibles, topicals, patches, and even bringing in my own father into a dispensary in his 70s, and he had no idea. He just thought that he was going to walk into a dispensary and it was going to be a whole cultivation site. And when he walked in and said, "Oh my God, look at all of these products," and I said, "This is what I do." And so I forgot what you asked me, but okay.
No, so that's great. So this is adult. We're going to transform into adult use as opposed to recreational, versus medical, where you're interacting with a practitioner, a doctor, a physician, some measure of licensed professional who's sharing a patient with you and those patient's concerns, and you're typically talking one-on-one to the patient as well.
And it's being exposed to, being able to have, I think they look at me very different. As I'm not a consumer, number one, and I want to do what's in the best interest of patients. And so when I go in and I do in-service presentations for physicians, I bring a different perspective. We're in California, and whether you agree or disagree, your patient is going to walk into a dispensary. We're in an area in which the holistic lifestyle is well and alive. There's more folks in a organic or supplement store than there is the traditional market. And so what I try, my message to the physicians is would you rather send them to my office and they have a 45-minute to an hour consult and we really include your team? Or do you want them to go to the dispensary and purchase something that you have no idea about?
Right.
My job, my entire life, is to provide information so families can make their own informed decision. Now I've taken it a step further, and my job is to provide information to medical professionals so they can help their patients make informed decisions. So I typically go in and answer questions. And I may not know all the answers, but I will find it. And that's, whether it's providing analytics of certain products, whether that's having a company representative come in and sit down and talk with us, and so we can figure out what are my patients putting in their body.
Right. And so what do you want to see on a label, whether it's in a dispensary or in a store? What are some criteria you want to see on a label of a product?
Tell me what it is. Let's just be, transparency is defined very different by a lot of people. I know California has their own set of regulations or requirements for labels. But I tend to work with companies that are completely transparent.
You choose to work with, that is a criteria, right?
Yeah, I choose, and
what does that mean? What are they willing to share with you?
What they're willing to share to me is information that's not on the box.
Okay.
And if I sit down with medical professionals and they say, we would like to see this on the box, that company, that's the first company I'm contacting to say, guess what? These physicians would like to see this on the box.
So at a minimum, we want it to be readable by you and by the customer, which means we want to know milligrams of the cannabinoid.
Yeah, I want to know what every single content is in this product. And I know
including the medium in which it's delivered.
Exactly. Right. And also I've been very fortunate to work for a dispensary that we do third-party testing. A lot of dispensaries will, say it's expensive, and trust me, I totally get it. With the new California regulations, I mean, you really have to, have a very wealthy group of investors, because California is forever changing, and we are the largest cannabis market in the world. And so there's a lot of, and so my job is to connect. My job is to be the bridge. Although I specialize in children on the spectrum, now as a healthcare advocate, being able to speak with hospitals, my job is information. I am an information hub, and I want to make sure that the medical community has skin in the game. And that typically means, to me, that I'm able to provide you with information so you can empower the rest of your medical staff.
Okay, so what I think is very important for us to clarify is, what is the difference in CBD that you're going to recommend from the dispensary and something that someone might get out and about on their own in a store?
Wow. Okay, so in the traditional markets, you're starting to see 0.3% hemp derived. That is the legal percentage, in which I'm pretty sure it's all over the country now, that is the standard. So for the most part, California has been changing regulations, and so it's really unclear. There's a gray area right now. Working with the FDA, they're starting to, edibles are starting to become a much larger group, and that embodies tinctures. And so when you go to a dispensary, what you're going to find is a CBD that has a percentage of THC in it, or a CBD that is an isolate but still has THC in it. There is a little bit of a gray area, because now we're seeing CBD stores pop up. We're seeing a lot of different percentages of CBD appear on the market. And so one of the CBD,
and THC.
Yeah, and THC. And so one of the my go-to for patients who are sensitive, or patients typically who are going through chemo and certain degrees of autism, I tend to use an isolate of CBD. And what the CBD does is it primes the body in order to accept THC. And so I've been doing this for the last 10 years, just understanding how to work with children on the spectrum. And so I found through my own research that priming the body was the best way to receive THC. And really having patients come into my office, and I have no background. And so my protocol, or my first step, is going through their list of medications, going through their goals, and being able to find the right CBD, or the right CBD with THC that works for that patient. And so typically when you go into a market to get 0.3% hemp derived CBD, there are some patients that are using that for a daily supplement, which I completely agree with. But then when there's certain conditions that you're trying to treat medically, you may need to go to a dispensary to get a higher CBD percentage or concentrate with a desired level of THC.
Okay. And so 0.3% below this limit of 0.3% THC that's 3,000 parts per million THC. And then the USDA Farm Bill said below that limit is acceptable in a hemp-derived product.
Right.
The detectable limit could be anywhere from 100 to 400 parts per million.
Right.
But the point is that even that which is now not a full spectrum,
Right.
still has some THC in
in
it.
it.
You just can't detect
Detect
it
it.
on, and so this is still, there's nothing that doesn't have some THC.
Right, and you know, the full spectrum for me is always the best way to go. Finding companies that have the cleanest extraction, doing your research on really what is in the product. So, you know, it's really, you say this is on the in the product, on the package, but is it really? And so finding companies that have batch numbers, finding, working with companies that you can verify their analytics. And so still here in California, we're getting better at finding or at providing standards, a standard operating procedures with regards to the lab testing. And so now we still have some variations of different labs, but the state and, you know, in California, we are leading the pack of, you know, how to do it right, you know, with respects to the analytics and companies who are held accountable.
So you're often heading toward a direction of full spectrum, but you're taking each piece separately and then later combining them, which is something you can only do in a medical setting. You can't, like, people aren't walking into a health food store and getting a CBD and then going somewhere and getting some THC and doing it themselves. Some people might, but
yeah, some people might
in the same way.
But I also am dealing with medical patients who walk in my office with a set of guidelines. And I have to work around those guidelines, and I have to be able to have that communication with their physician to say, this is why I think your patient should have a higher THC or low CBD, or the patient, you know, is not getting the relief, the proposed relief. And so really it becomes a team, you know, sport. You know, we all come together, and most importantly, the physician is leading the plan.
Okay. And so then what, if somebody is in a state that has not legalized medical cannabis or adult use cannabis, what is their best approach with what is available to them with, like, a health food store?
You know, I would, now you're able to buy CBD online, and you're also able to find CBD in certain stores. And I think that that's a great starting point until your state has medical marijuana laws.
Okay. And should they be looking for something that is has a claim on it, therefore it has maybe some terpenes or some essential oils or has some additional herbal ingredients? Will that help them to go in the right direction?
So every patient is different. My job is to do what's in the best interest of the patient and do what's in, and so sometimes that means you can't have a tincture that has all of these other herbs in it, and, you know, really having a healthy dialogue with your physician will better direct you in which CBD is going to be beneficial for you.
Right. And so for some people, it's like saying, okay, you have joint pain, and you could take fish oil and turmeric and boswellia for it, or you could get one of those and try it, and then add something else a while later and see. So it's really the same concept, because we're working with different compounds from plants.
Right, and when you take all of them at once, it's very hard to identify what's working. So I do, you know, sometimes most of my patients stay with me for 90 days. And we're actually able to figure it out. In the middle of those 90 days, chemo could end, chemo could get more aggressive, And so I try to find products that will work with the patient on a long term. I would rather titrate 2 products or 3 products than to have a patient come back to the dispensary and have to purchase new products. And I think the reason why that happens is because they're unable to do the consult. And so there's a lot of times where I have patients come in and they'll purchase products and then they'll make an appointment with me the next day, and then I completely switch everything around, and it gets rather frustrating. Yeah. And then also, you know, I have folks who have gone into the markets that carry the CBD, and it didn't work for them. So it doesn't mean that it's not going to work for the next patient. It just didn't work for that particular patient, and that's what brought them to the dispensary to speak with me.
Right. So what might be some reasons why it didn't work for them? I mean, I know that since the Farm Bill passed in December, we are seeing in hemp-derived CBD products a push for more clarity in labeling, because prior to that we had, you know, a total milligrams of CBD in the whole bottle, and people are having to do the math. You had a lot of products that have been identified as not
harmful.
Meeting their label claims. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You also have intervening components, which could be a lot of other plant compounds, other minors,
or other pharmaceuticals that they're taking.
And other, yes.
And so, you know, there are some patients that walk into my office and I have to tell, I don't believe you're a candidate for cannabis therapies. You know, maybe you should use the topicals, or maybe you should use the transdermal patches and other accessories. But I mean, there are some conditions in which CBD is not effective.
Right. Or they can't take it because they're on a very important medication that they can't go off of right now.
Right. And then there are, so, you know, I try to work with the patient, you know, when they come into my office, and, you know, it may take a while. And, you know, I try to remove the farce that they're reading online, which is, I'm going to cure. There is no cure. Cannabis is used to assist. Cannabis is a bridge.
Right.
And it's what I model, what I do. It is the bridge to, you know, your lifestyle. It's a bridge to, you know, your daily life. And so because of that, I had to make it a bridge to working with medical professionals and have them understand not everyone in the industry is a consumer. Not everyone in the industry is saying you need full spectrum, or you need. As far as I'm concerned, it all works, and it all works on its own time and at its own time, as well as you know, and empowering your own endocannabinoid system.
Right. I like this term as a bridge, because the fact is that, you know, exercise could make you better. Preparing whole foods at home could make you better. Interacting with the community and feeling loved and appreciated and acknowledged could make you feel better. Having a purpose could make you feel better. Getting more sunshine could make you feel better. But a person in certain situations who's unwell may not be able to do any of those things for one reason or another.
Also, the raw diet that you suggested, I've actually noticed a difference.
Yeah.
And
finding the right diet, I mean, that's the same, finding the right diet for the right person. It's not one diet for every person.
Yeah. And
so it acts as a bridge then, as you said, to, and I like this word prime that you use, this endocannabinoid system to find its balance.
Right. Because I've had a lot of patients that have come in and they use THC and they have an adverse effect. They have it's too much euphoria, couch lock, and it's because anxiety, and you know, and so that's not what cannabis does. Cannabis is one of the most powerful herbs that I've ever seen in my life. It actually promotes life extension. So with that being said, it's very important. The first, I guess the
exposure.
The
person's first exposure
yeah,
to
their
this plant.
first exposure, but it really finding the most appropriate starting point is key, because not only is that going to help you mentally thinking, oh my God, this is working, but it's also going to give you patience if it's not. And so if I give a patient, I have a patient that'll come in and say, well, I used to smoke and I can handle 30% THC. And I'm thinking, no, we're not going to start there. You haven't had cannabis in your system for over 30 years. And we need to take an acceptable approach in which if something goes wrong or we need to be aware of something, I'm going to include your physician. You know, I'm very, very quick to say, let's do this as a team. I'm not a medical professional. I'm a special needs mom who started off with one of the most difficult autism has to be one of the most difficult diagnosis, as well as the variations. So I've gone from nonverbal to verbal to, and so because I started off with these children, it's made it very easy for the patients who are coming in with, if not similar conditions. And so initially, I don't want to have a patient come in with their child and they have a bad reaction. So what I've done is taken all of the feedback that I receive from physicians and nurses, and then my own experience with hundreds of families since 2009, and now I've created a safe place and created a bridge with the medical community in which they understand I'm not for you need 30% THC to start with, because I know that that's going to backfire. I know that I want you to come back and say, Mieko, that didn't work, but let's keep going. And it's very hard to do that when your first reaction to THC is, I was couch locked for 4 days, I couldn't think, I couldn't pick up my kids, I couldn't. You're not coming back to the dispensary, and when that vote comes around for anything that has to do with cannabis, guess who's not voting for cannabis? So it is ultimately, it is my job.
And you said something to the effect that there's almost a detox reaction when people get too much THC in the outset, or
well, when you're endocannabinoid system, and so a lot of people don't understand and know if they're cannabinoid sufficient.
Right.
And that's when you go overboard. And what happens is, and I've seen this happen in quite a few patients, where the cannabis says, okay, you gave me a lot of THC and you've been eating junk for the last 10 years. In order for me to work effectively and be the glutamate blocker, I have to go in and clean house. And so there becomes a detox process. And I tell patients, if that happens, it may happen because you didn't prime the body before giving it such a high dose of THC.
And it'd be one thing if we could go in and say to people, okay, I'm going to give you a diet, I'm going to clean you out before I even do, but we can't do that. I mean, we know that there's very little patient compliance for that kind of a thing. And so what I'm hearing you say then is using a CBD separate from THC allows the body to gradually get prepared to then receive that THC, and also to even clean house gradually, and not all at once. We say this with any kind of a detox in nutrition, is you first have to be nourished before you can go in and ask the body to detoxify. And that applies to fasting or any kind of a cleansing. If you don't have the right nourishment, that's not going to be a good cleanse. And that relates a bit to what you said about using this to actually help a person get the nourishment they need.
I teach families about optimal timing. And so typically when a child his is very sensitive texture, very sensitive to foods, doesn't have a very, so in our homes, every 3 months, our child, Joey, was chicken nuggets for 3 months, peanut butter sandwiches. So he was missing a whole plethora of vitamins. And so I knew that I needed to give him CBD and THC because I needed the whole plant. I needed nutrients. And so with Joey, I gave him cannabis every 15 days. But when I did give him cannabis, with THC, the first 24 hours, instead of him having chips and munchies, and all of a sudden I started making green bean casserole. I started with the greens, spinach, salads, fruits, all of the foods that he would not eat. And so months and months would go by, and all of a sudden, not even months, probably within the first 15 days, his appearance changed. He was starting to receive nutrients that his body had never seen before. And so that is the glow that is missing. And so those first couple of hours, I knew exactly when he was going to hit his munchie, and he loved salad. Yeah. And he loved it. So when the cannabis was not active in his system, that's what he was requesting. And so that's something that I teach parents.
Wait, so that carried through even in the other 14 days that he wasn't getting the cannabis, THC-rich cannabis?
One of the reasons why is our children have elephant memories. Children diagnosed with autism can remember every single detail. Most of the time, we think that they remember and it's a bad thing. But if you're promoting healthy habits, it can be a good thing. And that's exactly what I've done. I've figured out how to train my son's palate, and now I teach parents all across the country how to train their palate when they have a caregiver's license.
Right. Yeah, let's put that back in there again. I got to get that caregiver's license.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because this is a huge struggle with every parent that I ever heard. They eat all white food, everything white, everything processed, won't stretch out. And then even when you would sneak polyphenol-rich foods, meaning brightly colored in there, it would cause them a reaction of some kind.
So in my research, researching, glutamate blockers, and finding out the cannabis is the mother of the glutamate. So it stops all the sensory processing. So at that time that the cannabis is active, what you have is optimal timing. Move in and do what you need to do. And I guarantee you within 5 to 7 days, your child will be requesting broccoli. That was Joey's favorite, broccoli and salad, fruits. These are all foods that before cannabis, he would have diarrhea from strawberries.
Right.
I needed to prime his body in order and so that's what I do. I teach parents how to prime the body. No, you don't start with, I started with THC, and I'm glad that I did, but as the years went by, I started realizing, well, Joey's only getting this every 15 days. And his body was fine-tuning, and I mean, typically, and I would get this from physicians who worked in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and usually children didn't look like Joey. Most children have an egg shape because of their mobility. And I had physicians come to me and say, what are you doing? Because he doesn't look like the typical Duchenne muscular dystrophy patient. And I said, well, he is, but I was knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone, and I had no idea. So it's cannabis, when used correctly, can be one of the most powerful tools in your tool shed.
And what you're tapping into is something really interesting with the most recent research on both the microbiome and on obesity and THC. Like they're seeing both an interaction with the microbiome, almost like it closes the tight junctions and creates repair to the gut
Yep.
in the moment, and creates better absorption of nutrients and less irritating things getting into the bloodstream. But the other flip side of that is that long-term use of THC or overexpression of even anandamide can then lead to obesity, which is a very interesting connection. It's out of balance. There's an imbalance in the system.
And I think in some patients, it's helped, and this is with adolescents with diagnosed with autism, especially in boys, it helps with their hormone therapy. So I've had some patients where I've had to stop and kind of like recalibrate.
As those hormones kick in.
As those hormones kick in, and maybe the frequency is not 15 days, but maybe it's every 7 days or every, and so, but I assure the family we're not changing products because we know this works, we're changing frequency.
Yeah. This is what is so important, and I really want to sum up with this, is that every person is different. Every person's endocannabinoid system is
specific
different
to their body.
Even if they didn't have a particular health concern that they were working with, their endocannabinoid system is still different from the next person's.
Yeah.
So even if you're reading online about somebody whose situation sounds like yours, it's a gamble to say, well, this might help me because it helped them, but we don't know. And no matter what you get, whether you get to see Mieko, whether you're seeing another dispensary or physician, or whether you're going into a vape shop or a health food store and trying something because of what somebody else said or what you read on the label, you have to try it to find whether it's going to work for you.
Most importantly, my job is hope.
Right.
And when I have, when I'm being grilled by physicians or being grilled by medical professionals, I have to remind them of the oath they took when they accepted, and to preserve life. And I said, you preserve life, I provide hope. And so, we definitely, have very similar missions. And before you shut me down, listen to your patients. I would much rather have a relationship with a physician who takes the time out for their patient and says, come see Mieko, and she's going to spend the exact same time, and we're going to do this together. As a single mom raising Joey, I remember sitting in the genetics office when they gave me the diagnosis of him terminal, and I was by myself. And I sat in a room full of 7 physicians weeping and crying and saying, your son did so much and has done so much for the autism community. And I just sat there and I said, this is the conversation that every family and every patient's family should be having in healthcare. That round table, it was probably one of the worst days in my life, but I realized how important it was to do things as a team. And they actually respected how I have conducted myself as a non-consumer, but a cannabis advocate that will not back down. So I do think this is a great time for the cannabis industry. It's a great time for medical professionals. But I still am, the same conservative Mieko from Good Morning America. I haven't changed. My advocacy has changed, but initially I just wanted to help one family. And I find myself in a different country every week helping one family. And I'm okay with that.
In your situation, it is one family at a time because every family is different. And working together as a team, having physicians share information with each other, having advocacy centers and dispensaries share information with each other, having researchers be able to compile that information and sift through it and come to at least associative conclusions is the only way that we're going to get anywhere, both with laws and with the ability to administer it.
Yeah. And I'm very happy to be a part of, I'm probably more grateful. I'm grateful. Before I used to say, you know, really, did I sign up for this? But I've been preparing for what I do today my entire life.
Well, Mieko, we're all grateful for you and for Joey, who's still with us here today.
Yep.
Making changes every single day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Welcome. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for joining me in this interview with Mieko Hester Perez regarding medical cannabis and how it can be employed in states like California, the research on it, and that whole journey. I think from Mieko we learned some very important things. We learned that cannabis promotes life extension and that it's very important to determine what that starting point is. And she's learned this through her own journey and her own lessons and experience with her son Joey, and then every patient after that that she has advocated for. And basically what I'm getting from what she's saying are these points. It all works, whether it's full spectrum, broad spectrum, isolate, multiple terpenes, no terpenes, it will all work one way or another. And the question is, what is your goal? What health issue are you confronting? And then what do you have access to? What are you able to obtain where you live and where you are seeing your practitioners? And so then number 4, it becomes extremely important that you be able to source clean, properly extracted, properly grown cannabis products, and that they are properly labeled and that you know exactly what it is that you're working with. And so in a state where medical cannabis and recreational cannabis are legal, that can be your practitioners working with an advocate like Mieko and coming up with a protocol that is best for you. And in states where medical cannabis or adult use are not legal, it's really up to each of us to be our own best patient advocate. And we're accessing hemp-derived CBD products through health food stores. That's really the best and safest place to do it. And we have to demand that companies provide us their certificates of analysis so we can see the contributing cannabinoids, so that we can see the ratios of CBD to THC, because that plays a huge role, so that we can see what terpenes are at play, if any, and whether there is detectable THC in that product or not. And then we have to be our own documenter and try to keep track of what works going forward. So to sum it up, you know, cannabis is it's an assistant. It assists the endocannabinoid system. It is a bridge for the endocannabinoid system to prime the endocannabinoid system. It acts like an adaptogen and helps it to achieve homeostasis in the body and multiple other systems, especially the immune system and the nervous system. And we all owe Mieko a huge debt of gratitude for the journey that she undertook and the courage that that took to walk down that path with your own child and then become an expert because of all of the other people that you've helped along the way. So Mieko and Joey are the ones that have paved the way, not only for us to have the kind of information we have access to today, but the research on it and the actual patient advocacy of licensed practitioners and medical professionals participating in this kind of medicine with the patients themselves. So please, again, do look up Mieko Hester Perez, her journey, her courage, her advocacy, and what that means for you today and what you have access to. Thank you, as always, for joining. Be sure to subscribe, set on that notifications button so that you can hear about new videos that are posted. Please be sure to like and share this video with all the people that you know it will help. This is real information, and this is about courageous people. And until we meet again, I encourage you to live long, live strong, and make a difference.